It's Flango again, and we're gonna make our last deck building video today. And then tomorrow I hope to get into my Basics Beginners series, where I win some games with some common-only decks, and then I'll show you some better versions of those decks for you to play up until, well, hopefully the top of ladder when that comes out, but until then, in tournaments, whatever. So yeah, let's get started. Today's lesson is on clocks and tempo and stuff. So basically, you when you play a deck, your deck, it has a turn on which it's the strongest, right? So if I'm playing a Dream Drake deck, I'm strongest on turn 1, where I'm just gonna hit you and then play a minion, and boom, you're already taking damage from 2 minions, right? Same thing if I'm playing like a big straight line moving card. It moves in a straight line, it hits you, and then I play a minion, and then it hits you again. That's turn 1, you're already being piled upon. That is, you know, sorry. That is amazing. And that's turn 1, right? Now, what if I'm playing like a Cocoon deck? That would be turn 2, right? Turn 1, I play Cocoon. And then turn 2, it evolves. And now I have a 20 mana minion that can move turn 2. And then obviously on turn 2 I'm playing another card. So now I've got, 3 cards, presumably to your 2. Maybe you played a card over here because you're scared of whatever's coming out. Now I also have board control. Because if we think about the board, if I'm like, okay, this was a mistake, but I moved up, right? And then I might have played my Cocoon here. Now, my minion can move like this. So you can't walk over here. And I already control a good portion of the board with my minions. Yeah, so turn 2. And then, there's some decks that come out on turn 3. So Swarm kind of comes out turn 3. I'm using all these bug examples, but so Swarm, turn 1, the plan is take some of the board and then play a mana card, be that the Garden, Ephemeral Garden, or be that even just Seance. It just needs to have 4 mana. And then hopefully you're doing something around here. Well, not hopefully, like presumably you're doing something around here. If you're gonna, like, if you're a swing first kind of champ or kind of player, then he'll like Swarm ends up here, and then you can't hit him. No way, right? And like maybe you play a minion here, but like Swarm plays in such a way that turn 2 or turn 1 you won't hit him. Turn 2, it's playing, and now it has, let's say that you moved over this way. So turn 2, it's playing Swarm, and it's at least getting 2 big minions. Oftentimes it's getting 3. And now all of a sudden, big board control everywhere, right? And it could be controlling this, but some of this, maybe even that, right? And then, presumably stuff's happening on your end too. Now, Swarm is interesting because that actually can come out, if you're going second, then it comes out turn 2. Because enemy king moves up or whatever, and then you play Swarm. Now all of a sudden you have 3 minions, and then turn 2 you can attack with them. But okay, so we know a little bit about clocks, and hey, we could think of a deck that comes out like turn 5, right? And I can't think of a deck off the top of my head, but there are definitely decks that play, like Desire's Guardian, right? Desire's Guardian, it'll kill your mana on turn 2 or 3 or whatever by controlling it and then executing it. or exchanging, sorry. And then it's going to have some shoot cards, and so the shoot cards kind of control this area, and then the opponent just plays their minions outside and kind of control this area, but they can't get in. And Desire's Guardian around turn 5 can say, alright, I have enough mana, now I can start moving up, playing my Dream Drake or whatever, and just hitting you up. And so that's a deck that comes out turn 5. Okay? Now, what I want to talk about today specifically is how these decks interact with each other. So, usually you want to come out one turn after your opponent if you're going to win. Like in a tournament, for example, one turn after your opponent. So, for example, a turn 1 deck approaches you, swings, and then has a minion on top of you. Well, a turn 2 deck can back off and then play its Swarm or play its Cocoon. Okay, now a turn 1 deck can try to keep chasing, but turn 2 deck has now gotten its bigger power spike, right? 3 big minions is way better than like 2 small ones. Even though the small ones are already on top of you, the big ones can now start to block for the king. Same thing with this. In this situation, it was Cocoon, 1 big minion, plus you're playing another 0 cost minion. So again, this deck here should beat a turn 1 deck. Now, turn 3 deck, that's like aggro with a little bit of mana or whatever. Well, aggro with a little bit of mana is usually 2 or 1. But it's more like it has more longevity. And it kind of has multiple power spikes. And you have to understand that all of these decks have curves, right? And I'll draw the curves in a second. Actually, I'll do it now. So, okay, here's your turn 1 deck, okay? It starts really high. It's loving it, and then it starts to peter off. Well, actually, depends on the opponent, but usually it's like, okay, this is turn 1, and then it peters off, and then it peters off, and then it just falls, right? After a certain point, the value it gets, now arguably, it's just playing 0 mana cards all game, but the value it gets comparatively drops. And so if it doesn't win by that turn, it's over. Now number 2, we can see, okay, turn 1, it's actually not doing much. Turn 2, big spike, right? And turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, turn 6. Now certain decks might play a little bit differently and they might drop off sooner, but they just use the value from earlier. Or they might be able to use this turn 2 spike to kind of keep going, and maybe they'll play something turn 4. Or some of them will keep this turn 2 spike, but then they'll drop later. But regardless, this is sort of what a turn 2 mana curve looks like. Or, well, value curve. And a turn 3 deck, I mean, there's a lot of these, so it's complicated. But the one that I talked about, what did I talk about actually? I can't remember. You're going over there and you're playing 3 min. Oh, Swarm. Yeah, okay. So turn 3 deck, you know, low. Turn 2, like turn 2 is where you're getting your value on the board, but you can't do anything with it. So I'd say it's still worth shields. And then big spike turn 3, and then down we go. Right. And in the case of Swarm, we fall down pretty fast because we're out of cards to play. We have just like a couple, like swap or something to kind of keep us going. And that's important to note, is that like you do often have like a small power spike later game when you get your card that your finisher. So for example, in aggro bog, that's your Vile Bog, right? Sure, you're running out of value over here, but really here there's a big spike because you have Vile Bog, and usually your opponent is in range at Vile Bog there. And then anyways, turn 5, I mean, they're starting low, they go up to like mid-height, and then they kind of coast at mid-height. sort of like, this would be like an aggro deck. And they kind of coast there, and they hope that that's enough. And then they pop all the way up over the aggro decks. I could go higher, but I don't want to get in the way. Well, I guess I could. Over the aggro decks. And then, honestly, they stay really high. And then they just keep going. And then they'll fall off eventually. But actually, they won't. So anyways, what you can see is that the highs here are always higher than the last high, right? Like, this would be the last deck. This would be the last deck. Okay, so you're always getting a bigger high than your last opponent. And this is actually not fully true. It kind of goes like this. And I'll explain why that actually matters in a second. But anyways, all this to say, this is sort of how all of the decks play their game. Now we're going to go into beating. So this one, slightly higher power spike. This one, same thing. This is going to beat this because it has a higher power spike and it has enough here to defend, usually. Now turn 5 deck against the turn 3 deck, that's a little bit different because sometimes the turn 3 deck, hits their power spike here, right? And then sometimes this is how the turn 5 deck looks. Other times, this is how the turn 5 deck looks. So this can kind of like turn 3 to 5 decks, sometimes it's either way, but for the most part we're going to expect this, right? But what about a turn 1 deck versus a turn 5 deck? That one's hard. Desirous Guardian decks, for example, always have to kind of pass the first turn once you aggro on them. They have to mana, or else they lose. Or they can control execute one of your creatures, but still they have to deal with you being on top of them and playing another turn of 2 hits, right? So if you have a big attack creature, it's not going to fly for the Desirous Guardian. So oftentimes we see 1 mana or turn 1 decks beating turn 5 decks. What about turn 2 decks? Well, it's really hard to say. With the two that I talked about, though, that being Swarm, best case scenario, and that being Cocoon. Well, Cocoon gets shut down pretty hard. A lot of the turn 1 cards, like mana cards and stuff, get shut down pretty hard by turn 5 decks who, kind of keep it safe. Turn 2 decks, they can't always get in because turn 5 decks have a chance to play that first power spike. The thing is, on turn 1, let's say your power spike is up here. That's a big gap. But on turn 2, if your power spike is, let's say, here, that's not as big. I mean, I didn't draw it perfectly. But, like, this right here, this distance here, versus, like, this distance here, it's not drawn to scale, but it's different. Very different. Especially as a turn 2 deck if you're going second. Because if you're going second, turn 5 deck is already on turn 3. Like, it's almost done. It's almost ready to win. So, oftentimes this is the way it goes. And then, turn 2 decks might do really well against like a turn 7 deck if that exists. It probably doesn't exist in a competitively viable standpoint, but we can already kind of tell that it would probably beat turn 5 decks, lose to turn 2. Hard to say. It might be slow enough. Like, the reason it's turn 7 might be because it plays like really, really anti-aggro in the early game, slowing down its sort of playstyle, meaning that it can actually beat turn 1 decks. Maybe. But maybe turn 1 decks beat it. We'd have to, it's a deck by deck basis when it's this big of a difference. But usually, what we have, and let me just clear this entire thing. Usually what happens is you have this sort of curve, right? And here's aggro decks. Here's control decks. And here's mid-range decks. And usually what happens is that you have control, it it usually beats aggro, and aggro usually is too fast for mid-range, and mid-range usually is too fast for control, right? So you want to be either a little bit slower than your opponent, because control that spikes here. Oh, and these are not drawn to scale. This should, like, control should only be down here. And then there would be a difference in power level. But a control that comes up here usually just outlasts this control and wins the game, right? And then this usually is too fast. See how low this is? And a turn 7 deck, which would be control, is sacrificing its mid game by playing these like 1 or 2, well, normally 1 or 2 drop, right? But in this case, it would be like turn 1, turn 2 cards. That would be like Castle Knight, right? Castle Knight is great at dealing with these aggro decks because you get to attack twice for 6. That's 12 damage. That's more than you can get from anything else on turn 1. And often it'll hit because usually you're... Let me just clear. And often it'll hit because usually you're cornered, right? This is, let's have black be you. Okay, usually this is cornered. So if I can like walk out and then play Castle Knight here, then it's going here or here. So I can either swing like this and swing like this, or I can swing like this and swing like this, or I can swing like this and this, or this and this, or this and this, right? Either way, no matter where it's going, I can swing. And that's only on turn 2, obviously, but just as a general idea, that's how it works. You can play cards like Castle Knight, which are good early game, but then your mid game, I mean, you're still sitting on cards like Castle Knight and whatever other early game cards you chose, and those are bad against cards that cost 10 mana or 20 mana. But those cards are really bad, obviously, against cards that cost 80 mana. So we've got this curve, right? And so control decks usually take this side and this side, leaving this side alone. And aggro decks usually take this side, leaving both of these sides alone. And mid-range decks usually take like a tiny bit of this side, but usually it's all this side, and they leave that alone. So yeah, that's sort of how card games work, and Domain is not very different in that sense. So yeah, I hope you learned a little bit about clocks and playing the meta. If you see a meta deck come out, so I mean right now it'll maybe be like Bog Duel, because I have to reference Swamp with everything I do. But we have this deck that uses this card right up there, Bog Lurcher or whatever it's called. It's not Bog Lurcher. Bog Creep. I don't know. Anyways, that card, it gets used, and it duels with cards like Harvest Blade and whatever. And Barrier. And so that deck is kind of like turn 2. It sort of plays, I don't know, it's complicated because it has really good longevity. That's why it's a good deck right now. It plays a minion turn 1, or it plays like a Soul Collector or something to give mana, Ephemeral Garden usually, and then it goes in. And then it just keeps going in, no matter where you go. It just attacks you and attacks you. And it's a really good dueling card because it has 16 attack, and it has 63 defense or something like that. And your king does not win in a duel against that king, ever. And then, if it starts to, then Wraithblade plus 6 attack every turn. That's awesome. I mean, look at that attack. And then you can play another Wraithblade, or another Wraithblade, or a Barrier, and now this is 2 free turns. So it's just a really good deck for just dueling the king, and it can usually keep up. And then you play like Swamp for keeping up. And yeah, that's sort of the game plan for that deck. Anyways, that deck is like, let's say it's like turn 3/4/5/6, right? If you can go really, really late you can beat this deck. So if you play a turn 4 combo deck, right, you can just stop them. Or if you play a swarm deck, maybe swarm decks are like, they're kind of turn 1. Maybe they're aggressive enough that they actually stop them too. Um, as long as you can figure out a way to, you don't really want to be on the same mana as them, but you want to be either slightly later, so you can play turn 4 or turn 5, maybe turn 6, maybe even turn 7, right? But turn 7 you're gonna have to like build in some early game, because this deck can kill you turn 3, 4. So maybe that's really where we're worried, right? So if you play a turn 5 deck or turn 6 deck, this deck has some longevity, but it's high into low. If you're low into high, well, bigger high, then maybe you win. Play a little bit slower, good chance that you will get your spike before him, or after him, and it's better. Or play earlier, a lot earlier, good chance that you will get your spike before he gets a chance, right? So yeah, that's sort of my my video on how to analyze a meta and how to beat it. Obviously, Domain doesn't have a big meta yet, but this will be useful information for you when you're playing online, when a ladder comes out, if there's like pre-tournament, if people are releasing any decks, you know how to beat them. I might do more videos on like this when there's an actual meta out and I can do like an analysis. Maybe I'll do like a, I don't know, maybe not bi-weekly meta-analysis if it gets to that point. Um, but yeah, overall, I hope you kind of learned something about the game and meta game and sort of the aspects of the way that this game works. Thank you for watching. I've been Flanga. Bye.